if there was an alien civilization that interpreted propagations through the air through a different sense, maybe they saw the sound waves or they had something else, we wouldn't call it sound. They weren't experiencing sound. Hello and welcome to Chairlift Philosophy. I want you to imagine a tree in the middle of a peaceful glade in the forest. Nothing is moving. And one day, the tree comes crashing to the ground. No birds scatter, no animals run away, there's no man or machine around to even record its occurrence. Now the question I want to ask you is, did the tree make a sound? One answer is, of course the tree makes a sound. Things make sounds when you're looking at it, and even when you're not looking at it. The world doesn't revolve around you. You know, the moon doesn't just exist when people are looking at it. When I hear this answer, I can't help but feel it's answering a different question. We're not asking, does the tree exist when no one's looking at it? We're not asking these global skeptical questions. We're asking about a specific property existing only if you observe it, namely sound. The real question we should be asking ourselves here is, what is sound? Now, another very popular answer is, as we learn from physics, that sound is a wave. It's energy propagating through a medium. So, problem solved. Sound exists, it's waves propagating through a medium. That occurs when a tree falls down, even when there's observers or not. So there we go. Not so fast. Let's consider, is that really what sound is? Think about it for a second. If you were to describe to a deaf person, someone who's never heard any sounds in their life, and they're trying to ask you, what is a sound? And you were to tell them, oh, well, sound is just a wave. It's just propagations of energy through a medium. Do you think the deaf person would then understand what sound is? Do they know what it's like to hear something? Well, of course not. And is that what we really mean when we say sound? Do we really mean energy propagating through a medium? We can try another argument as well. If sound literally means waves, these are identical propositions, then we can use them interchangeably. When we say we feel a vibration rather than hear it, we're saying we're feeling a sound. But that doesn't sound right, does it? It's not exactly what sound really is when we talk about sound. Similarly with light, we could say light is a wave as well, goes through a medium, or without a medium. You might say it's a relevant distinction, but if sound is just a wave, or it's just fundamentally energy, really, then I don't see how we can distinguish our terminology between sounds and lights. To get a better grip on this argument, let's use some terminology. So, philosophers would use two kinds of qualities. You'd have primary qualities and secondary qualities. A primary quality is something that exists, a quality that is intrinsic to the object. So even without observation, this object will have this quality. This will be something like an object's mass, its shape, something that doesn't depend on an observer or the relative position or how you're observing it. A secondary quality is something very different. This will be things like texture, taste, heat, colour. These are things that depend on observers. Different observers will interpret these qualities of the same object differently. So these are called secondary qualities. Now the real question we want to ask ourselves here is sound a primary quality, so therefore it would exist even if no one's observing it, or secondary quality, so it wouldn't exist unless there's an observer there. So now with our primary and secondary qualities in mind, let's think of an analogous example to help us clarify. So imagine we have our tree again, but this time the tree is engulfed in flames. The tree is very hot, or is it? Is it really hot if no one's there? That's the question. Heat, you'd say, is a secondary quality, because even between people, hot and cold is variable. It depends on how close you are, depends what kind of person you are. It's the kind of sense perception that wouldn't exist in the world without observers. Now, of course, there'll be temperature, but this isn't really what we mean when I say hot or cold. The atoms will be moving at a faster or slower rate That's what the temperature measures. But that's not hotness or coldness. We could have an idea of atoms moving fast or slow without the idea of hotness or coldness. Or similarly, let's consider the texture of the tree. If no one's around to see it, does the tree have a rough or smooth texture? It's all about scale. If you zoom out very far, a giant might seem the tree is flat on the bark. But if you zoom into the scale of an ant, it could be huge mountains and valleys. And which one is the real one? Which observer has the correct perspective? They can't all be right. So what we might say is this is another secondary quality. Now what we want to ask ourselves is, does sound fall into this category of secondary qualities? If any of these examples fail to convince you, I'd be interested to know what you think the distinction is, where sound and heat differ, or texture, or one of these secondary qualities. Why is sound an intrinsic property to the universe, do you think? The final thing I want to remind you is that a wave is not the same as sound when we're talking about it. So if there was an alien civilization that interpreted propagations through the air through a different sense, maybe they saw the sound waves, or they had something else, we wouldn't call it sound. They weren't experiencing sound. They're experiencing waves in a different way, just as we can feel vibrations in a different way to hearing vibrations. This leads us on to our media moment section of the video. So in this section I'm going to talk about something in the media, such as a film or literature, that is relevant to the themes I was talking about. So an obvious example when you're talking about difference between appearance and reality might be a film like The Matrix. These are classics, or Inception. But as I said in the beginning of the video, we're not questioning the entirety of our reality as they do in these films, but a specific thing, namely sound and the quality of it. For this reason, my choice is going to be Arrival by Denis Villeneuve. So this film has some interesting uses of sound design, which you can find in this very good video in the description, but also the themes are very relevant here. While they're explicitly not about the same thing, we can think of them both being about representation and reality. In Arrival, we can think of meaning itself as the real object out there in the world, which corresponds to the sound waves in our example, and the representation will be the language, whereas in our example it will be the sound that you have in your ears. Whilst it may seem that the words we use hold intrinsic meaning, there can be a whole different way of representing the same thing, and maybe learn something new because of it. Thank you for listening to this episode of Chairlift Philosophy. Hope to see you again next time.